Let's pray together, church. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. The end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Father, you have given us a very simple task. You have called us to yourself, and you have called us to live lives that serve you, that make much of you, that obey your commandments, that honor and exalt the gospel that has saved us. And we just pray now that through the preaching of your word, you would equip us to do just that. You, by your Spirit, would work in our hearts. You'd help us to see the great many ways in which we have been equipped already to serve you. You would shake us, God, from slumber. You would wake us up. You would keep us from wasting what you have given, from squandering your gifts. And Father, that we would live joyfully, faithfully, obediently in service to a great master whose yoke is easy and whose burden is light and who has given us good gifts. We love you and we pray all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Well, over the last couple of weeks, we've gone through the season of graduation speeches. Many of you may, if you've got a graduating senior, high school, or college, maybe you've sat through such a speech over the last few weeks, or maybe you've seen them on the internet. The rising generation has received the age-old exhortation: be yourself and make your mark. Right? That's the gist of pretty much any graduation speech. Find your thing, whatever that happens to be, whatever you're good at, and then use that thing to do something great. And maybe if you're lucky, you'll be remembered, you'll be commemorated, you'll be recognized for doing something great with what you're able to do. It's another kind of graduation speech theme. Be someone they'll write a book about, right? Accomplish something impressive, Einstein had E equals MC squared. Eli Whitney had the cotton gin. What are you going to do? Find your thing, do your thing, and hopefully you'll be recognized for your thing. Well, in our passage this morning, we're going to see that each of us does indeed have a unique gifting. We do have a unique contribution to make, God-given abilities and blessings that we must put to use. But in this passage, we're also going to see what use we ought to put them to. And more importantly, we're going to see whose recognition really matters. So we're in the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. If you've been with us, we've been in Matthew for a little over 2 years. We're taking our time walking through this great book. We're near the end, as I said, chapter 25, and we are in a series of Jesus teaching his last sermon in the Gospel of Matthew that is all focused on the end times, the eschaton, the final judgment, the second coming, these big, epic, last days kind of things. And last week, if you were here, Carl very helpfully walked us through the parable of the 10 virgins, where Jesus' command is really simple and really clear. Be ready. I'm coming back. Be ready. And today is really very much a part 2 to that passage. So Jesus commanded last week, be ready. And this week is very much about how to be ready, what to do while you wait for him to return. And Jesus does that by telling us another parable. This is known as the parable of the talents. So here's how this is going to work. If you're a note taker, I'll give you our outline for today. First, we're going to walk through the parable, just kind of get it all in front of us, understand the story Jesus is telling. And then we'll kind of ask the big question, what is Jesus doing? What's his point? What's this parable metaphorically saying? And then third, I want to spend a good chunk of time talking about how we can obey Jesus' teaching today. So there's your outline. A walkthrough, get the story in front of us, and then what's the point, and then how do we actually do that? So let's go ahead, let's jump in to Jesus' teaching, starting in verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability, and then he went away. Jesus starts with a pretty simple premise. It's not very complicated. There's a guy and he's going on a journey. But notice, it doesn't say he's moving to Canada. It doesn't say he's a free spirit, he kind of goes where the wind blows him, so you don't know. He might come back, he might not. No. It's a journey. He's going to return. This is a temporary situation. But before this guy goes, he entrusts his property to 3 of his servants according to each of their ability. He gives them his money according to what he thinks they can handle, and then he goes. And so we have 3 servants that most of this passage focuses on. We have the first servant who gets 5 talents. For the sake of memory, we'll call him 5-talent Freddie. The second servant gets 2 talents. We'll call him 2-talent Timmy. It was going to be 2-talent Teresa in my notes, but because I wanted a woman in there, But then I realized there's a masculine pronoun used for 2-talent Timmy. I didn't want to get angry emails, so we're calling him 2-talent Timmy. And then the third gets 1 talent. We'll call him 1-talent Wesley. I checked. We have no Wesleys on our member rolls. If you're visiting today and your name is Wesley, I'm sorry. We have 5-talent Freddie, 2-talent Timmy, and 1-talent Wesley. And the obvious question for us before we really get anywhere is, what's a talent? What is he talking about? Well, a talent was a first century unit of currency. It's money. It was actually the largest denomination of currency that existed. You may have heard of a denarius. We've seen that other places in the Bible. A denarius was a coin that was a single day's wages for a laborer. So think of a denarius as minimum wage. You work for 1 day, you get a denarius. And a talent, it's not a coin actually, it's a measurement of money by weight. So literally think of a big bag of money. That's what a talent was. It was about, we're guessing here, but it was about 75 pounds of coins. So a talent is what you use when you have so much money that it's just a pain to count it all out. No one wants to count out 75 pounds of coins, so you just put them in a bag. Oh, it weighs about that much. We'll call that a talent. It came out roughly, because it's by weight, to 6,000 denarii, 6,000 days' wages, or 16 years of minimum wage currency. That's the kind of money we're dealing with. So, the very clear thing for anyone listening to Jesus' parable in the first century is this dude is loaded. Wow, he's got some cash. He's leaving behind 128 years of daily wages, and that's with no weekends, no sick days, 128 years of daily wages, 600 pounds of cash. So 5-talent Freddie gets a boatload, but 1-talent Wesley, he's still getting a lot. 6,000 or 16 years, 6,000 days wages, 16 years days wages that's a lot. That's a lot of money. That's the setup here at the beginning. The master gives them the cash and he leaves. Verse 16. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground, and he hid his master's money. It's pretty simple. Again, the first 2 servants, Freddie and Timmy, they use the money they're given to make more money. Freddie, it says, traded with it. It's not quite clear what he means by that. It doesn't tell us what Timmy did. But both of them double their haul. They use what was given to them in order to make more. They get a return. But 1-talent Wesley does something different. He gets a shovel, he digs a hole, and he buries the money in the dirt. And it doesn't tell us yet, it will in a little bit, it doesn't tell us yet why he might do that, but we can make a couple guesses. Maybe he was lazy. Certainly, for Freddie to turn, 5 talents into 10 talents took some time. That's not something you can just do on a weekend. That's a significant amount of working with the money, following your investments, trading, whatever he was doing. That took a while. It took some work, and maybe just Wes didn't want to put in the effort. Another possibility is maybe he was scared of losing it. That's probably the most obvious thing. Banks in those days were generally reliable, but there's nothing better than get a shovel, dig a hole in the dirt, and bury the money, because, then no one could ever take it. Unless they saw you do that, you just, 12 paces from this tree, only you know where it is, and that's better than cash under your mattress, right? It's just there, and it's stuck there until you go and get it. It's the safest option available. So maybe Wes had some extreme risk aversion. And then the master returns, and we see how each of these strategies worked out. Verse 19. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So it took a long time, but the master does come back. He does indeed return, and he comes with a purpose. He wants to settle accounts. He wants to see what they've done with the talents that they've each been given. So they line up, and they do a little talent show. I always thought I was going to get booed for that one, but okay, I'll take it. I think I deserve to be booed for that one, but that's all right. All right, servant number 1, 5-talent Freddie. What happens to him? Verse 20. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you have delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. So 5-talent Freddie is given a boatload of cash, and he returns with 2 boatloads. It's pretty good. But what's remarkable is the master says to him, You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. So the master looks at 10 talents, which in today would be in the multiple millions of dollars, and he says, that's a little. I'm going to give you a lot more. And then his final reward is not just a financial compensation. He's told, enter into the joy of your master. There's an affection, a delight, a joy between master and faithful servant. That's Freddie's ultimate reward. And then we get servant number 2, 2-talent Timmy. Verse 22. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you have delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And now this is interesting, because the second servant, 2-talent Timmy, didn't make half as much money as Freddie did. 5-talent Freddie, is unloading the dump truck and making it rain at his master's feet. And, Tiny Tim here has a little wheelbarrow he's rolling up and bringing his money. But he gets the same reward, the exact same commendation as the first servant did. You've been faithful over little, I'll set you over much. Enter into my joy. And so we learn something here about the master. We learn something important, and it's that he's not just after the bottom line. He's not just after the who made the most, the biggest numbers. He's just as pleased with Timmy's wheelbarrow of results as Freddie's dump truck. Why? Well, he said it to both of them. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful. He emphasizes it. Their faithfulness is what he was looking for. It's what he wanted. He's not after just raw results, the thickest stack of bills. He's looking for faithfulness. And that's why the third servant, 1-talent Wesley, is in trouble. Verse 24. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, And I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. So before he even gets to any of the financial side of things, before he even says, hey, welcome back, hope you had a nice trip, One Talent Wesley starts impugning the master's character. He says, I knew you were a hard man. You reap where you didn't sow. You gather where you scattered no seeds. In other words, he's saying you're an exploiter. You're mean. I don't really like you, and I don't think you deserve this, so I didn't do anything. It's a classic, I'm not the problem, you're the problem kind of strategy. Before he even, thinks about what he's been put responsible for, put in charge of, he complains about how mean the master is. And we see that his reason, at least as far as he's concerned, his reason for bearing the talent, as he says it, verse 25, is, I was afraid. I was afraid. So fear. A paralysis of a fear of the master's disapproval. He just didn't want that. And so that's why he chose the safest option. He was also lazy, as we'll see in a minute, but he's just, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to mess this up. I'm just going to bury it and do nothing because I'm afraid. And he just kind of awkwardly then, dumps the one talent back in the master's hands. It's pretty awkward. Here, have what's yours. It's almost like if your friend were to, give you their car keys for you to run an errand, you crash it or something, and you come back and here, you can have what's yours. It's just there's an awkwardness in this exchange. And then we get the master's response, verse 26. But his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gathered where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. And at my coming, I should have received what was my own with interest. So he sees past the excuses and he says, here's the problem. You're wicked and you're lazy. So yeah, fear was a part of it. But you could have put it in the bank if you wanted to do nothing. You were just as lazy as you could be. And so the master punishes him. Verse 28. So take the talent from him, give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away, and cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So 5-talent Freddie, the first servant, gets 1 extra talent, and 1 talent Wes is left with nothing and thrown into agony. He was risk averse. He was lazy. He was afraid. But very clearly, his fear was misplaced. He took the safe route. He was afraid of messing things up. But the safe route meant squandering his talent. And in the end, he was the only servant who was not safe. That's the parable of the talents. And now that we've got it in front of us, I want us to step back. I want to ask, what is Jesus doing here? What's his point? What's the meaning to this parable? And to get there, I actually want to spend a minute talking about the English word talent. Because when you and I say talent in English, we don't mean money. We mean someone's skill. We mean someone's ability, what they're capable of doing. We literally think of a talent show. A talent is what you're good at. And over 1,000 years ago, in Old English, that is not what the word talent meant. In Old English, talent was also a measurement of currency, similar to it was in the New Testament era. That's what its original meaning was in Old English. And in the 9th century, the meaning of the word talent started to change a little bit. It also meant an amount of money, but it started referring to someone's ability. Somewhere in the 9th century, we have historical evidence that started referring to someone's ability, what they're good at. And then in the 1400s, in the days of Middle English, talent started to exclusively refer to someone's personal gifting, what they were able to do. It didn't mean money at all anymore, and obviously modern English has retained that meaning. Why the change? It used to be, in Old English, a measurement of money, and now it doesn't mean anything like that. It means your abilities, your skills, Why did it change? Well, I think very fascinating historical fact is that this parable is where the English word talent comes from. Now, you might know that the Bible has played a significant role in the development of Western languages and cultures. That's not an opinion, it's just a historical reality. So there's terms we use that we may not even know are from the Bible. A classic example, apple of his eye. Someone says, you're the apple of my eye. What does that even mean? Apples, eyes, what are you talking about? That's actually a Hebrew idiom from the Old Testament that God uses to talk about his people. They're the apple of my eye. Or we say someone's on the straight and narrow. Well, we don't know it necessarily, but we're referring to what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount when he talks about the straight and narrow path that leads to righteousness. Well, here, verse 15, the master gives out the talents. It says, according to each servant's ability. So here in the parable, there's a relationship between the servant's ability and the talents they are given. And previous generations of Christians, those who spoke Old English and then Middle English, studied this passage. They recognized that what Jesus is referring to in some way metaphorically by talent is your God-given ability. And so they started saying talent to mean that. And so our English word talent comes from Matthew chapter 25. And that's going to help us a lot. That's going to give us, I think, in part at least, the key to unlocking this parable. But I do want to be careful. Because what we shouldn't say is, okay, that's where we got the word in English from this actual parable. Therefore, whatever we mean, we can just, wholesale transpose onto the passage. That's the metaphor. Here's what I mean by talent. Here's what it means in the passage. I think we still need to do the work of looking what Jesus is saying, the textual work of saying, what does he mean in this parable when he says talent? Part of it is going to be ability, but I think there's a little more than that we can say. So I've got 4 things we can say from this parable that a talent is. And then I'll give you a definition of what Jesus means by talent in this passage in light of these 4 things. So first, a talent, whatever it is something that first and foremost belongs to God. A talent is something that belongs to God. That's who the master is here in the parable. It's Christ. It's God in the flesh. He's the authority. He's Mr. Moneybags giving out the cash. Psalm 50 says God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, which is a very old school way of saying he's loaded. He's rich. He's got all the cattle. He's the wealthy one. So a talent here is something that belongs to God first. But second, a talent is something God gives. It's something that he gives. He may own the cattle on 1,000 hills, but he does share them. The master gifts his servants the talents, and God also gifts his servants what is rightfully his, our talents. And therefore, number 3, a talent is something to be stewarded. That just jumps out of this passage. It's something to be stewarded. If it belongs to God and it's something that God gives, it comes with a responsibility. It's not like, God says, hey, here's some money, have a fun day at Six Flags, or, spend it how you like. No. A talent comes with an expectation of how it will be used. It's not supposed to be buried in the dirt. It's supposed to be leveraged for some gain. It's supposed to be dispensed for a purpose. That's what a talent is. And that brings us to number 4. A talent is something to use for God. So it's something that is God's first, something God gives, something to be stewarded, and something to use for God. The master here gives out the talents, and because he gives them out, that gives him the right to demand an accounting, to come back and say, what did you do with what I gave you? So your talents, whatever they are from God, and that gives God the right to place expectations on you for how you use your talents. So in light of all that, I think we can arrive at a definition. In light of this parable, what we mean by talent in English, as I said, is a little too narrow. It's not just ability, although that's part of it. I want to expand that a little bit. Here's the definition that I've come up with for whatever that's worth. When Jesus says talent here, he means any God-given ability, resource, opportunity, or position that must be leveraged for Christ and his kingdom. That's what he means. Any ability, resource, opportunity, or position that must be leveraged for Christ and his kingdom. That's what we're called to do while we wait for Jesus to return, to deploy what he has given us for him. Abilities are included, but when I say talent for the rest of this sermon, don't just hear abilities. I want you to hear, for the rest of the sermon, any ability, resource, opportunity, or position that must be leveraged for Christ and his kingdom. That's what I mean. We don't twiddle our thumbs and wait like One Talent Wesley did. We don't just sit back, bury it in the dirt. Jesus is saying you work for God with what you have from God. And with that centerpiece in place, I think we can unlock what the rest of this parable is doing. We can see how the rest of the pieces fit together around that central piece. So here, the master goes on a journey, but he's coming back. Obviously, super straightforward if you've been paying attention in Matthew 24 and 25. Jesus has ascended into heaven, and he is coming back. And in the meantime, he has given gifts to his people. Paul talks about that in Ephesians chapter 4. He says this, grace, it's another word for gift, by the way, grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, so there's salvation, and he gave gifts to men. And then in the next part of Ephesians 4, he lists several of those gifts. Other parts in Paul's writings, he talks about spiritual gifts, and they do range from the elaborate and visible, the exciting, to the ordinary and more hidden gifts. So what are some of the talents that Jesus gives his people? What are some of the gifts he gives? Well, there are some that are abilities, skills. Paul talks about administration, hospitality, teaching are gifts that God gives. Many of the things, though, that you do in your career, knowledge that you've gained, whether about computer sciences or finance or theology or whatever, different abilities, knowledge you've gained that God has providentially woven into your life, expertise would certainly be included in some of the talents he's given. There's also resources like our finances and our time. Maybe you're unmarried, you don't have kids, you've got a lot of free time on your hands. Paul specifically spells that out in Corinthians and says that's a gift, meaning it's meant to be used for God. And there's countless other things we could say, opportunities and positions that God providentially brings into our lives, maybe positions of authority or influence in the lives of other people, new and variety of ways to serve him. And God is sovereign, of course, over every one of these things. He gives these gifts. He hands them out according to his own wisdom and good pleasure, and he expects us to use them for him. That's what he expects. But notice, the point is not who's got what talents. The point is who is faithful with their talents. Freddie and Timothy, the first two, they're faithful. They use what the master gave them. But the third servant, Wesley, takes his one talent and he squanders it. And in a minute, I'll highlight many ways we might, too, squander our talents. But one day, the parable shows us, Christ will return, and he will demand a return on his investment. Verse 19. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So there's a delay, as we've said already. Jesus has not returned as quickly as we had hoped, but he knew that would be the case. Doesn't mean he's not coming back. He is, and he will settle accounts. And there are two possible results of that accounting. So result number one, we see in verse 21, there's those, he says, you are faithful. And it's interesting, he says faithful over little, which I think right there is just a really good, humbling reminder that it doesn't matter how awesome and epic you think your talents are, compared to God, they're pretty tiny. They're little. But those who are faithful over that little are rewarded with much. It's nice to have talents today. It's nice to be 5-talent Freddy. You've got all the gifting in the world, but nothing compares to the unending delights of God's reward, the joy of the master. No matter who you are, the reward the master gives makes everything else, any resource, any ability, any position you had in this life, just pale in comparison. Because Christ, the master, invites his faithful servants into his own joy. Psalm 16:11. Psalmist writes of the Lord, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Put all the blessings, all the gifts, all the resources of this life on the scales and put Jesus on the other side and just watch him crash to the ground. There is nothing on this earth worth comparing with the joy of a God who rejoices over you. That's the first result, the faithful servants, but there is another possibility. There's the wicked, the fearful, the lazy servant who squandered his talent, who buried it in the dirt. He did nothing with it, and he is condemned. And we might be tempted to think Jesus is saying something like this, that Christians who don't reach their full potential will be punished. But that's not the point. Remember, Jesus doesn't care what the payout is. The master rewards 5-talent Freddy as much as he does 2-talent Timmy. It's not about the bare results. He cares about faithfulness. Because faithfulness reflects the servant's relationship with the master, and that's what he cares about. That's the point. The first 2 servants, they looked to the master's joy, and they did well. But the third servant, he feared the master's disapproval. He doubted the master's goodness, and he wasted his talent. And that's why. Because he didn't believe the master was really good. He didn't think he really deserved it. His inaction was the proof he wasn't right with the master. So as soon as the master came back, he's leveling all kinds of accusations at him, impugning his character, saying it's your fault. There is a profound difference between those who serve Jesus because they love him, because they look to his joy, they look to his blessing and approval, and those who claim to serve him but are instead consumed with laziness and fear. They're so worried about getting it wrong, so they do nothing. A passive servant who buries his talent out of self-preservation does not love the master, he loves himself. See, faithfulness is the sign you're really the master's servant. That's the difference. This isn't a passage about, useful Christians and lazy ones. This is a passage about real Christians and false ones. Those who really love the master and those who don't. We see that at the end. In verse 28, the master says, "Take the talent from him," the third servant, "and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." What is Jesus saying? Well, he's actually quoting himself there. He already said that in Matthew chapter 13 in the parable of the sower. Look at this. Verse 11. "And he answered them, to you," he's talking to his disciples, "to you, disciples, it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. But to them," he's talking about unbelievers, those he's not talking to them it has not been given. Why? "For to the one who has, more will be given. He will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." The parable of the sower was about the difference between true disciples and false ones, and it's the same difference Jesus is talking about here. He's not saying lazy Christians get punished. He's saying if you squander what the master has given you, you don't know the master. And that's a problem, because that's what really matters. Jesus has given talents. He will demand an accounting, and that accounting will reveal who truly loves him. So with this parable in mind, I have for us 6 exhortations for the exercise of your God-given talents. 6 exhortations for how you and I should use our abilities, our resources, opportunities, and positions that God has entrusted to us while we wait for Christ to return. First, very simple, recognize and exercise your God-given talents. Recognize them and put them to use, exercise them. God has given everyone in this room a unique gifting. Every servant gets a talent. He didn't skip you in line. He didn't miss you that day. Every one of you, God has given you a unique blessing, a gifting of his own design. He has brought circumstances providentially into your life. He's put means at your disposal. He's given you things you're just naturally good at. He didn't overlook you. And so exercise the things he has given for his kingdom. One of the really unfortunate realities that has happened in Christianity in America is we have a very commercialized view of the church. We've transposed this consumer mindset that our culture has, and we've put it on top of the life of the church body. So what we do is we view the church and her ministry as the domain of the professionals. Those who maybe stand on a stage and wear a microphone, they're the ones with the gifts that matter, and everyone else you just get to receive. You're the consumer. You take what they give you. And that is nothing like the New Testament vision of the church. I'm not saying the preaching of the word isn't central. It is. It is always central in the New Testament, but not as an end point, but as a launch point. What we're doing here is meant to equip you to go into the world, into the life of our body, to do the work of ministry, to serve each other, to bring the gospel to the lost, to disciple your fellow brothers and sisters. That's what you're called to do, not just to come and receive, but to go to receive and then to go do it. Use the gifts God has given you for him. Jesus has given you talents to steward. Leverage them for his kingdom. One of the most obvious ways you could use something for Christ's kingdom is to be involved in the life of his church and use it in the life of his church. And some of you, I imagine, are sitting here thinking, I don't know what my talents are. Again, maybe God did skip me that day in line. And I would just encourage you to just get involved in community. Dive into the life of the church, into life with brothers and sisters, because that's where talents are often discovered. It's not like you take it, there's all kinds of, spiritual gifts inventories. You take a test. Oh, good, this is what I'm good at. Now I guess I'll do it. No, it's you're just doing normal Christian things, and someone says, dude, you're amazing with kids. Have you talked with Carl about serving in the children's ministry? I mean, you have a gift, man. Or someone says, man, when you talk about the scriptures and you handle them and just your mind for kind of unpacking what's in there, it works, it clicks. Have you talked with Lee about like leading a community group or something? I mean, we just discover these gifts in community, in the life of the church together. It's not a scavenger hunt. Just jump in and see what God does. Gifts are discovered in community, so identify and exercise your gifts. Second exhortation. Concern yourself with your own talents and don't compare yourself with someone else's. Concern yourself with your own talents and don't compare yourself with someone else's. It seems significant. The third servant here, 1 talent less, he got the smallest amount of money, and he was the one who squandered it. Maybe he got to his turn in line and he was bummed. 5-talent Freddie's, got his 5. He needs like 10 people to help him carry it. And then 2-talent Timmy, okay, well, that's pretty good. And I got 1? Maybe he was jealous. Maybe it poisoned his mind against the master. Maybe that's part of the problem here. Even though he got 6,000 days' wages, by the way, which, that's quite a gift. If that's the lowest bar the master gives, there are no insignificant gifts. One of the reasons we might squander a gift is we value someone else's more than our own. And so we think, I won't bother. Everyone wants the big, obvious, exciting talent, right? Everyone wants to be Freddie. Cool, he can do all these things. Everyone likes him. It's impressive. He's got all these abilities. He's got all the resources. Freddie's great. But man, 2-talent Tiny Tim, he got way less. He made way less than 5-talent Freddie. And man, the master didn't care. He didn't care. He gave him the same reward. It's not about faithfulness, or it's not about the results, it's about faithfulness. Stop fretting about what someone else has. Stop worrying about what their gift is. Worry about your own. Right, we're called to shine as lights in the world. You might think of it like this. Every Christian is a light bulb. And God has designated in his sovereign providence a different wattage for every Christian. And if we spend our time stewing over, Freddie got the bigger wattage, we're going to miss the point entirely. The point is to shine. Shine with what the Lord has given you. I will say, in my own flesh, I wrestle with this. There's pastors out there, they've got podcasts, they're publishing books like crazy, they're moonlighting as seminary professors, and they're doing all the things I'm doing. And I'm just like, how do you have all this time in your hands, first of all? Just capacity is ridiculous. And I'm tempted to feel, what's the point? If I can't measure up to them, maybe it's not worth it. And I have to remind myself, if every pastor who's not, John Piper or Kevin DeYoung quit, the church would collapse. I have important work to do. Maybe it's not as epic as theirs, but it's just as important for me to be faithful. I'm not going to give an account for anyone else. I'll give an account for myself. And my reward, if I'm faithful, will be no less. I'm called to steward what the Lord has given me joyfully. So don't compare yourself into passivity. Just be faithful. Just be faithful. But third, never use talent as a trump card. Never use talent as a trump card. God has given talents, abilities, resources, opportunities, positions, and he expects us to leverage them for his kingdom. They have to be used for him, but God always, 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 always prioritizes character over talent. Always. It matters more that you are humble, godly, and mature than that you absolutely maximize your talent. This is another area where the church in America has made mistakes. We have prioritized ability over accountability, and the results have been really, really bad. Talent is never a trump card. If someone came to me and said, hey, I know a lot of theology. You don't want to waste me on the children's ministry. I would think 2 things. I would think, first of all, you're totally undervaluing the need for rich theology in the life of our children's ministry. And second of all, maybe changing diapers is exactly the humbling you need. You should go talk to Carl. Talent is never, ever, ever a trump card. Number 4, on the flip side, don't squander your talents under the guise of false humility. Don't squander your talents under the guise of false humility. In my experience, in a generally healthy church like this one, where character is rightly prized over ability, there is sometimes an allergy to public, visible service. We think if you're seen for doing something that's inherently bad because it could tempt you to pride, and therefore you ought not do it. I want you to think of it like this. Imagine you're on an airplane and someone's having a medical emergency. And the flight attendant yells, help, help, is anyone here a doctor? We have someone who's got a problem, and you are a doctor. And you're sitting there and you're watching the medical emergency unfold in front of you, and you think, man, if I help this guy out, they're probably going to applaud. They're probably going to be like, whoa, 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 you saved the day. Maybe there'll be a news story about me. They're going to make a big deal. I'll look like some kind of hero. And I know my heart. I know I'll be tempted to pride. So I'm not going to do it. I shouldn't do it because I don't want to become proud. And I hope you see what nonsense that is and how actually self-centered that is. Because yes, beware pride. Pride is deadly. It is poison. But don't bury your talent in the dirt because you're so scared of pride. Don't waste it because you're like, anything visible is bad. Use your talent and also work on putting that pride to death. Remember, the third servant, what did he do? He took the safe option. He took the safe option. And he refused to use his talent. The church, Christ Church worldwide, does not merely need godly Christians who are willing to lead from the back. The church also needs godly Christians who are willing to lead from the front. There is often, as I said, an allergy to visible service, but I believe, and I think I got Bible to back this up, it is a false humility. It is a false humility that shuns any kind of visible service because humility doesn't mean do nothing. Humility means give yourself for the good of others. Serve others. And yeah, they might see you do that. You don't do it for them to see it. But if they see it, it's not like that's a bad thing inherently. So I'll get real practical for you. I told Carl I was going to make this point, and he said, great. I would love some help leading our music ministry. So, if you're here and you're thinking, I do have a talent in music, but I don't want to be on stage because people might see me and I might be tempted to pride, stop listening to yourself and go talk to Carl. Pretty straightforward. Carl, you're welcome. I'm just running advertisements for you all day today. Children's ministry, music, all kinds of things. Very simply, don't squander your talents under the guise of false humility. Fifth, leverage your talents with everlasting life in mind. Leverage your talents with everlasting life in mind. I've mentioned already many reasons why, or many ways in which we could squander our talents. A consumerist view of the church, comparison with others, false humility. This one's probably the most common, though, and it's definitely the most dangerous. Because the danger here isn't that we don't use our talents. The danger here is we use our talents on something that doesn't matter. God has not given you talents for your own personal success. God has not given you talents for you to use on whatever you desire. God has given you his gifts so you might work for him with what you received from him. And he will demand an accounting. There's something, particularly in America, again, that happens when we recognize our God-given talents, whatever it might be. Again, it could be a massive variety of things. Don't just think spiritual things. It could be literally anything. God has wired you. He has equipped you. He has given you resources, all kinds of things. There's something that happens when we recognize the abilities, resources, opportunities, and positions God has given us. And what we do is we look around. We see how everyone else around us, our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, how are they using their God-given talents? And we see, man, they're chasing their American dream. They're climbing up that ladder. They're getting more and bigger stuff all the time. That's what they're using their talents for. That's the goal. That's the aim. That's what they want most out of life. And we think, maybe I could do that too. Let me plead with you, church. Don't bury your talent in the dirt of the American dream. Don't bury it there. Use it for something that will last. And I want to take a minute and again get very, very specific. Because at our last covenant member meeting, if you're a member and you were there, Jared shared that we, the elders and the staff, have realized a failure in our discipleship of this church. An oversight, a flaw that is our fault. And the failure is this: we almost never talk about money. Almost never. I mean, the Bible's really got to bring it up for us to go there. And the reason we've done that is out of our own cowardice. We know there's all churches out there that are money grubbers, that are just all about money, and they're just talking about it constantly, and that's the whole point, that's the goal. And we don't want to be that. And yet we have fallen off the other side of the cliff. We have failed to talk about something the Bible talks about a lot. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to be very clear and hopefully set right one of our own wrongs. Before it meant ability or skill, talent meant money. That's what it meant. And the reason Jesus uses a financial metaphor here is because money is the most obvious application of this parable. I mean, it's like not even a metaphor, and it's already the point. Because money is God's. Money is something God blesses us with. Money is something that we are called to steward. And money is not meant to just sit in a bank. It's not meant to sit under the dirt so we feel safe. Money is meant to be leveraged for Christ and his kingdom. Jesus says, Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Notice the principle. The heart follows the treasure. The heart follows the treasure. If you get a fancy new car, spend a ton of money on it, your heart is just going to be wrapped up in every little scratch and ding because you put all your treasure there. That's where your heart's going to be. And that's why Jesus says, store up treasure in heaven, not just because it'll last, although it will. Moth can't ruin, rust can't destroy. It will last. But he says, store up your treasure in heaven because he wants our hearts panting for heaven. He wants our hearts panting for his return. He wants our hearts panting for everlasting life, and we will if that's where our treasure is. We will long for his return if that's where we've put our treasures. One of the most fundamental practices of biblical financial stewardship is giving generously and joyfully to your local church. It's not about the amount. Remember, it's about faithfulness. He's given you what you have. Are you using it for his kingdom? John Piper has famously said, only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Is that how you live? Is that how you're using your talents, whatever they might be, including money? Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. He will demand an accounting. So leverage your talents with everlasting life in mind. Sixth and final, and far and away the most important exhortation. Love the master. Love the master. Remember, the third servant's primary problem wasn't his fear. It wasn't his laziness. It was his relationship with the master. That's why he squandered his talent, and that's why he was condemned. But if you know and you love Jesus as your master, you'll see he's not a hard man. Maybe this master really was. We don't know. Jesus isn't. He's gentle and he's lowly. And he's not an exploiter. He's just the opposite. He's a savior. He's the one who gave up what was rightfully his in order to give us what we never deserved. He had every right to leave us as we were, but he chose to give. He chose to empty himself, to give out his life as a ransom for many. He sowed his own death so that we could reap life. And he planted the seed of his gospel in our hearts so we could be free from sin and self and live forever with him. That's the kind of master he is. And there's no better master to serve, so there's no risk you could take for him that isn't worth it. There's no better reward than his joy, and it doesn't matter if you've got the 5 talents or the 2 or the 1. The reward of the master's joy is the same. The king who endured the cross, what could I not give for him? And in light of that, all the cliches of graduation speeches just dissolve into meaninglessness. Because it doesn't matter if you made your mark, if you were yourself. What matters more than anything, it doesn't matter what people remember. What matters is what he says. The moment after you close your eyes in death and you see his face and you hear him say, "Well done. Good, faithful servant. Enter into my joy." That commendation is the only one worth living and dying for. Let's pray. Jesus, you are a good master. You are a giver of many gifts, and we pray that we would use them for your name. We would magnify your name in our communities. We would encourage one another in your name. We would lift up one another, bear one another's burdens. We would use the resources, the opportunities, the positions, the abilities that you've given us for your sake. God, keep us from being misers. Keep us from squandering your gifts. And help us to serve a wonderful master who has given us all of these things and one day will give us something infinitely better, the reward of his joy. We love you. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.